I was like, come on. So what was the relationship that Joram, king of Israel, has with Elisha different than the relationship that his father Ahab had with Elijah? Based on this, and this is just seems really out of, it's not out of, probably not out of context or out of the ordinary, but all of a sudden we see Gehazi standing before the king, and the king's going, oh, boy, tell me all the good things that Elisha's doing. And, you know, I don't know why he would do that, other than he wants to think, you know, Jehovah's with us. You know, that's the only thing I can think of. But what is the relationship between Elisha and Jehoram different than Ahab and Elijah? Anybody? Yeah, Gary. Okay. He didn't want to talk to him at all. Yeah, that's it. And here we've got, you know, a representative of Elisha standing before the king and talk about all the good things. Now, Jehoram, you know, he's like so many other people. They're subject to their own emotions. When Elisha brings the army, remember the army goes to get Elisha. They're going to kill him because he knows every time, you know, where they're going to be hiding to get the king, and he warns the king. So they want to kill Elisha. So they go to Elisha's house, and this is when, you know, Elisha goes, look, he's telling Gehazi, look at this army up there. But when he takes the troops, he has them all blinded, he takes them to Samaria. Right? And he takes them to Samaria. What does the king call Elisha during that time? Anybody remember? I know Robin knows, but she's not going to say it. Anybody remember? He calls him father. There's this relationship that they have, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Jehoram's brother, Ahaziah, dies and is judged because he's calling on, you know, he's going to inquire of Baal. And when he dies, I think Jehoram, or Joram, whatever you want to call him, I think he sees some of the writing on the wall, some of it anyway, and he puts away the Baal. I don't know that, and we'll get into this, I'm pretty sure he doesn't stop all the Baal worship, because we're going to get into that here in a next chapter or two. But he's smart enough to know when something is working that you don't reject it. In that same chapter, after he calls him father, and then there's a siege on Israel, and we see that there's this cannibalism thing happening. He becomes so angry, he wants to kill Elisha. So he's very much, subjected to his own emotion and to all these things that, he wants to face for whatever reason. But the overriding factor in, as I read it, is that he likes Elisha, and I think only because he understands, I think, if nothing else, that he has this power of, through God. God is his he telegraphs through, God telegraphs through him, and that's important to him. Important enough that he wants to listen, and then he wants to listen to all these great things that he's done. So, anybody want to add to that? Okay. All right, verses 7 through 15. Then Elisha came to Damascus. Now Ben-Hadad of Aram was sick, and it was told him, saying, the man of God has come here. Okay, just so you know, this is the king being told about this guy. Okay, this is a thread. It's not a real blatant thread, but this is one of the dots. If we connect dots, we can see God's power working. Okay. The king said to Hazael, take a gift in your hand and go to meet the man of God and inquire of the Lord by him, saying, will I recover from the sickness? So Hazael went to meet him and took a gift in his hand, even every kind of good thing of Damascus, 40 camels loads, that's a lot. And he came and stood before him and said, your son, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, has sent me to you, saying, will I recover from this sickness? Then Elisha said to him, go say to him, you shall surely recover, but the Lord has shown me that he will certainly die. He fixed his gaze steadily on him until he was ashamed, and the man of God wept. Hazael said, why does my Lord weep? Then he answered, because I know the evil that you will do to the sons of Israel. Their strongholds you will set on fire, and their young men you will kill with the sword, and their little ones you will dash in pieces, and their women with child you will rip up. Then Hazael said, but what is your servant, who is but a dog, that he should do this great thing? And Elisha answered, the Lord has shown me that you will be king over Aram. So he departed from Elisha and returned to his master. To him, what did Elisha say to him? What did Elisha say to you? And he answered, he told me that you would surely recover. On the following day, he took the cover and dipped it in water and spread it on his face, so that he died, and Hazael became king in his place. Okay, the first time I read this, it's so typical. It's difficult to keep all of these things in place sometimes. When I read this, I realized, okay, things are starting to fall in place, especially when you read the name Hazael. Does anybody remember where that name comes from? Anybody? We've heard this name already. 1 Kings 19, right? God, and this is that spinning plate I keep talking about. God has already passed judgment on the house of Ahab. And when we get to this part, we realize that everything up until this part has worked together for the judgment against the house of Ahab. And later it'll be this even bigger judgment against Israel. But right now, God is working to make this happen. And that's going to happen in the next chapter. And so my question to myself was, why would a king in Syria call out help from a Jehovah God prophet? That was my first question. Why would he do that? And this is one of those dots. This is the power of God working in this scripture. And it all has to do with this judgment. Why would he feel comfortable doing that?
He was sick.
He was sick.
Why did Rahab the harlot? Why did Rahab do what she did? Right? Everybody knows that when push comes to shove, the God of Israel is the one who shows up and actually does something.
Okay. Oh no, go ahead. Anything else on there? I think that's a great point, because in the minds of all these people, that's a thing that's out there. That's one of those spinning plates that's causing a lot of these different things. Yes. Jay.
David being appointed king over Israel earlier on, but the Philistines also knew that. And so when you read the scriptures, you see where they sing about Saul kills 1,000 and David 10,000. So
yeah,
things get known throughout that area of what's happening because of the events. And I think that's part of the significance, is because all these miracles are happening and things are unusually happening, and people are talking, and they're talking about it.
That's exactly right. Right. I mean, and this is to the point that we're really going to be bringing up in the following chapters. Every one of these nations has their God, right? Everyone has their God, and you're expected, as that nation, to represent that God. We're going to. I really want to just jump ahead, but we're not going to do that. Aaron, go ahead.
Well, in 2 Kings chapter 5, Naaman was also sick.
Ah, man, there you go.
And, one of the servants of Israel
Yeah.
told him, you need to seek out the prophet of Israel. He can heal you. So the Syrians, like Adam said, knew that there was power in Israel. The God of Israel could do things that their little g gods could not.
Exactly. That, and this, and then you look at the whole movement that God's building up here. How is he going to get into the Syrian king's head? Well, you have one of his generals become ill, and this is the beauty of how, just God is so powerful how he makes this all work. And to that point of the servant girl being the pivotal point for all of these other things to happen. And so that's how you get into the king's head, that God is powerful. And it's also the flip side of Ahaziah. So here's God showing that if you're looking for a different God other than me, here's what's going to happen to you. You're going to die. He fell through. He was ill. So we see these illnesses come up, and people seeking after God to find out things. Well, God says if you go after Baal, you're just going to die. So this king completely understood it, and in my mind, I am just flabbergasted when I finally was able to look back and go, I understand that God controls all these things. I get it. God has authority over everything. But when you see all the little tiny nuances on how God works, and he picks the most quote-unquote insignificant people to make it happen, it's just, it's beautiful. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Adam.
I don't know. I'm kind of fixed on verse 11 right now, which says, and he fixed his, this is Elisha, right? Elisha fixed his gaze and stared at him until he was embarrassed.
Yeah.
And then he started weeping.
Yes.
Right? And I'm just trying to imagine what it would have been like for Elisha to see, like literally see the future unfolding before him as he's staring into this man's eyes, this Hazael's eyes, right? And he starts weeping because he understands that Hazael is going to go back and lie to the king, murder the king, become the king, and do massive harm to Israel. And that must have been a really intense moment.
Okay, and I am in total agreement. When you read that, wow, and it just puts you right inside Elisha's head, how he's seeing these horrors happen to his people, and it, emotionally just drains him, obviously, and he starts to weep. But this is this overriding sort of story that God is telling us in the Old Testament over and over and over again. Why is it that a nation like Israel can't just go, maybe we just need to go back to Jerusalem? Why can't they, if they know that God is God and he wants you to go to Jerusalem and worship there, why don't they do that? If King Hazael, who, and we'll see in the next chapter, is anointed by God to be the king, why doesn't he worship that God And then instead, why does he start murdering his people? That's the big question. Do we have an answer for that? And this is why I say this is humanistic behaviors. This is a humanistic behavior study. And it isn't just about pointing out that the Syrians were terrible or that the northern kingdom was horrible. It's about what any of us can do at any given time. What causes that? Anybody? Evil. Okay. Jay.
If he's anointed king in the previous to this, it's kind of like he's thinking that God is telling him he's thinking, oh, God's telling me to murder my master. And he's thinking, I'm somehow right with God because I'm being anointed. He's thinking something good of me, and he's not thinking about it correctly.
Yeah,
And maybe partly because he doesn't have the written scriptures like the Israelites are supposed to have and supposed to know. So maybe that's what it is. It's all about they think they're right just because certain things, like somebody gets rich and they think, oh, God must be blessing me because I'm righteous or something, but it's not necessarily the case.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Jehu does that, and Hazael is not physically anointed. I should clarify that. But it's enough that he is made king by a servant of God. In the verses where the messenger is actually doing it, I don't know that we read. Either way, it doesn't matter. If God says it, you're anointed. Yes, go ahead. Back to the point. I think it's important to get to that point of why not just they, but anybody can have this sort of mindset against God, even though we know who God is.
Well, again, going back to 1 Kings 19, when God reveals himself to Elijah, not in the strong wind, the tornado, the earthquake, but in the still small voice.
Yes.
He asks Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And then he says, I alone am left. Of course, we know that then God reveals that you're not alone. But right after that, the Lord said, go return your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. The anointing of Hazael as king over Syria was the response to the children of Israel forsaking the covenant of God, tearing down the altars and killing the prophets. That's why.
That's why.
That's
that is
why.
the why, yes. Okay. Adam.
So when you ask about the why in terms of human nature, my mind jumped to the book of James. James chapter 4, he talks there, he says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people. And he goes on from there. And previously also in James, he talks about the fact that our own passions and desires
Right.
lead to sin.
Right.
Right? So you talk about the why. Well, ultimately, it comes down to Satan's original temptation with Eve, the FOMO effect, the fear of missing out, right? We're not fulfilled because we haven't put our faith and our trust in God.
Yeah, that's it, right? Well, it's all those things. James is really good at explaining that. God doesn't make us sin. It's just, whatever we want to do. And this is kind of what's going on with these kings, but it's not just about kings. We're going to see that it's about people in general. It's about the other citizens as well. The kings have a big responsibility, yes. Jehoshaphat had to remove the idols more than once. Why? Because the people keep putting them back up. Why do they keep doing that? Even though they know who God is. Because they want to do, we want to do a lot of times what we want to do. That is the issue. And the revelation from Jesus is, you better check your heart. And this is what David reveals to us is, yeah, you're not going to do perfect. But, we need to have the right heart. I need to have the right heart about this. And it's not about what can I get from God. And I say this all the time up here. When we hear the doctrine of God wants to give you stuff, run away or try to refute them or whatever. But that's a lie. God doesn't want to give you stuff. He wants to give us life because he loves us. But that means my entire heart needs to be subjected to him. And this is what they're not doing. And the human mind has a good way of creating its own cognitive dissonance of saying, well, I see the evidence over here that God is who he is and he expects a lot of things. So if I do a couple of good, let's not forget, God is still defending Israel. Even though they've done all these goofy things, he helps them defeat Moab and do all these things, and he's still defending them in a lot of ways. And so they think they're doing, I must be okay because I'm worshiping God in Bethel. So they create this bubble around themselves. And this is not God telling us that let's judge Israel for creating a bubble in their life so that they can actually reject me even though they think they're not. This is about everybody. This is what people can do. We can reject God and just have a little bit of faith, have a measure of faith, and not give God our heart. And that, to me, is the overriding message throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. Okay. Anybody want to add anything to that? Robin? Verse 15?
13.
13.
It says, So Hazael said, But what is your servant, a dog, that he should do this gross thing? Does he not know his own heart, or is he trying to fool Elisha?
I think he has no idea. And when I read it, I think I read it for the way it's written. Like he has no idea that this kind of thing is going to happen. Because it's an extraordinary thing he just said. You know what? You're going to go around literally slaughtering innocent people. And that was, I don't think he saw himself as ever having that kind of power or authority. And he just really was, what am I, a dog? Why would I do that? Not that wasn't unusual for that day. People were doing these kinds of things already. Anyone else? Oh, Ida.
You're too nice.
Am I too nice?
Yes.
Okay.
Because to me, I see it as he's just trying to act like,
Okay.
I would never do anything like
So
that.
I think this is what Robin is saying. So maybe he's just trying to save face because it was such a horrible thing that he was saying. And he does it later, doesn't he? So okay. That's totally possible. And as things progress, it's totally true, isn't it? All right. Okay. Verses 16 through 23. And we've also been asked to read 2 Chronicles chapter 21. I think we'll probably have enough to read it, and then I'll just go over what 2 Chronicles brings out, because Barry wants to make sure that we understand Jehoram and all the things that he did. And this is Jehoram, the king of Judah. My name's Daryl, and this is my brother Daryl. This kind of thing is happening. So we have these similar names, and we have to be able. I just have issues with being able to read this thing methodically when we start using the same names and stuff. But, so 16 through 23. Now in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then the king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, became king. So from what I read, there was a period of time when even though Jehoshaphat was still alive, his son became king. There was 32 years when he was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab became his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. However, the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah for the sake of David, his servant, since he had promised him to give a lamp to him through his son always. In his days, Edom revolted from under the hand of Judah and made a king over themselves. Then Joram crossed over to Zaire and all his chariots with him, and he arose by night and struck the Edomites. Okay, this is not going well. Who had surrounded him and the captains of the chariots, but his army fled to their tents. So Edom revolted against Judah to this day. Then Libnah revolted at the same time. The rest of the acts of Joram and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And in 2 Chronicles 21, we read that Jehoram kills his brothers. Nice guy. Kills his brothers and some leaders of Israel. He revolted against, Libnah revolted against Jehoram because he rejected Jehovah. And that goes back to my point where, look, if you're not, whose God are you? You know, he's worshiping Baals, he's doing all these goofy things. He built high places, promoted sexual sin. That was common in those days, these pagan practices in their service to their gods. He led people astray. Because of all this, Elijah sends him a letter, and that the people will suffer, and Jehoram himself and his house will suffer sickness and pestilence. The Philistines and Arabs pillage Jehoram. He suffers a horrible bowel disease for 2 years before he dies, and he is buried, but he's not desired. The people don't like him. And he's not buried with his fathers, with David and all the other kings before him. So we can see that things are just really going south. Now things are going south for the southern kingdom, right? How did Jehoshaphat, a good king, Jehoshaphat was a great king, in my mind. He messed up, but he was a good king. How could he open the door for his son Jehoram to be a bad king? Jay, and then Aaron.
By trying to fellowship Ahab.
Yeah.
And that's a bad influence because
Yeah.
Jezebel was influenced Ahab terribly.
Yes.
But Ahab was weak and didn't stand for what was right.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Aaron, did you have something?
I think it's the same point that Jay was making. Who was his wife?
Atalai. Yeah.
Yeah. As Ahab's
Yeah.
daughter.
Yeah. Ahab's daughter.
So-
Yeah. Yeah. That's the big issue. And I think we've talked about it already, about being unequally yoked. Here's a prime example. We learned that in the scriptures, in the New Testament scriptures. We talk about being unequally yoked, and this is the infiltration. This is the leavening, if you will, of evil practices starting in the other kingdom, and now it's infiltrated into the southern kingdom. And God reprimanded Jehoshaphat a couple of times for letting this happen and making it happen. And we've talked about why Jehoshaphat might have thought it was a good idea. You know, we're one country, we should be unified. And that might have been, you know, his reasoning for, you know, why this was a good idea. But I doubt that he inquired of God, because this is just a terrible outcome. Okay, we see that I just wanted to add that one more time, real quick. We see how closely these two families are. They share the same names, they share the same purpose, and unfortunately, that purpose isn't God-centered. You know, it's just going worse and worse. Okay. Any questions or anything up until now? We're just about out of time. What about this letter from Elijah? Isn't Elijah gone? How does that work? What do you got, Kay?
Well, something that I read said that Jehoram was a co-regent with Jehoshaphat for several years, and that was during this time Elijah was still alive, and probably didn't get taken up until the very end of this co-regency, so he would have been around to write a letter. That's just something I read about it.
Okay. Yeah, I read a bunch of that stuff too. Jay?
I think that's a good possibility, what she said. However, there's another possibility too. You can always write a letter, give it to somebody, and then at a certain time, I want you to deliver this letter to such and such after he's gone.
Right.
And so that's possible too.
Yeah, prophecy is words, and written word is words. It could have been a prophetic letter, absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah, I don't know that there's a definitive answer to that. I like to think that he wrote it from heaven. I did also read in my reading that some people were saying that he wasn't taken to heaven like everybody says. And the only issue that I have with that, because that word heaven can mean, you know, different things, either in the atmosphere or whatever, you know, just the air. He was just taken up into the sky. It's like, okay, and then what? He was left up in the sky? God took him. Where is God? That's how I look at it. I think the not going to heaven thing would be pretty hard to argue, but maybe that's true, but I don't think so. Okay? All right, thank you. We'll pick up there next week. Thanks.